My name is Gemma Hatton. I'm Deputy Editor of Racecar Engineering magazine. I've studied the Motorsport Masters here at Cranfield a couple of years ago. Since then I worked in Pirelli F1 and Manor Formula 1 team as a tyre engineer.
My name is Mark Jenkins. I'm Professor of Business Strategy at Cranfield School of Management, and I'm interested in how managers and organisations can learn from the high performance world of Formula 1.
Hi, I'm Clive Temple. I'm the Programme Director for the Motorsport Engineering Masters. I've been involved with this particular programme since it was established. I was one of the people who was behind it. That's nearly 18 years ago. And I'm very interested in all aspects of Formula 1.
So, we've got a great panel here, and our aim is to have a nice sort of informal discussion and chat regarding this year's season in terms of Formula 1, the technical changes, talking about the halo, tyres, maybe a little bit about Formula E, and going on to what we think is going to happen for the 2018 season. So, obviously the biggest visual change that we've all seen and has received quite controversial feedback is the halo. And I'm interested, Mark, in what you think about the halo, really.
Yeah, I mean, my view of the halo is anything that improves driver safety is a good thing. There have been a number of terrible accidents where drivers have been struck on the head with wheels or other bits and pieces, so I think anything that makes them safer, I'm for.
Yeah. And Clive?
Well, one of the things that interests me where the halo is concerned is that it was actually an afterthought in certain respects, that it came later. So I'm wondering what impact that's had on the cars themselves, because the designers have had to then address an issue that they've got to put the halo into the design of the F1 car.
Well, I think for me the most interesting aspect about this halo is the fact that not only has it got to be homologated itself, so that way I think the halo itself weighs about 7 kilograms, but it's also had to be homologated here at the Cranfield Impact Centre at Cranfield University as part of the chassis, and those are the crash tests that we've been hearing about in the media in terms of withstanding the weight of a London bus, for example.
Yes.
And I think that, in addition with your comment about the delay in terms of it, or the late time it was confirmed, has given some teams a huge challenge, because I think having to strengthen the chassis enough to not only incorporate the halo and withstand the additional crash tests has added about 13 kilos to the chassis, but the minimum weight has only gone up by 5 kilos. So every ounce of the halo and strengthening in the chassis has had to be saved somewhere else, and I think for me that's probably the interesting challenge with regard to the engineering behind the halo.
Do you think we'll get used to it though? I think it was Jackie Stewart said when they put wings on Formula 1 cars, everyone said, oh, they're horrible, they're terrible, and now we just accept it.
I was one of those people with the halo. I thought visually it would detract or remove the fans even more from the driver, because it can be quite difficult to see their driver's helmet and know who's racing on the track. But actually, having been to F1 testing, you do get used to it. The drivers are getting used to it. They aren't complaining of any visual impairment, so they can see. There was an interesting comment from Bottas, actually. He said that now that they've actually got the final design of the halo rather than the prototype, it's actually much easier to get out of the car, because obviously the real halo is much stronger than the prototypes they were using. So, and for me it's the engineering challenge. They have got a tiny little bit of freedom, and I think we've noticed that on testing. There's some vortex generators on the top of the hearse, for example. As ever, Formula 1 teams using exploiting every avenue they can.
Yeah. Undoubtedly, it's an opportunity for the designers to advance the design of the car to enhance the performance, and it will be interesting to see how the halo lends itself to that. You mentioned the aerodynamic dimension, and I think that it's going to be interesting.
Definitely, and from the feedback from the teams is they were very much using testing as an opportunity to figure out what they're modelling in terms of the effect of the halo is actually what is happening. So I think we saw a lot of pressure wakes and a lot of aerodynamic testing going on, But I think when it comes to the first race is going to be the first time that we actually see a bit more of a convergence in terms of the actual designs of the halos. Even though they're subtle changes, it's from an engineering perspective, it's very interesting.
And you'll probably get sponsors' names on them
well,
as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's all opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and I mean, have we got anything else?
Well,
any other
what I
comments?
was going to say there was that, like you, I had some scepticism about the halo, the design, how it would relate to the driver, but also the fan, what they would see. And I'm intrigued as to what the contrast is between the Indy solution, which has been to use a screen, as opposed to Formula One, where they've gone down the halo path. I mean, in the past, we had Formula One cars back in the 1960s that ran screens. And aesthetically, to my mind, it looks better. And I would have thought that it was quite a good solution. But F1's gone down the halo path. And why?
I think, and I don't know about you, but on social media, there's been a lot of negative feedback regarding the halo, some positive as well. But in regards to the aero screen used in IndyCar, actually very positive. And I was, like you, sort of wondering why there's this discrepancy. And for me, my understanding is that they're trying to achieve two different things.
Yes.
So the aero screen is more about the sort of smaller objects and deflecting those, for example, with Massa and the shock absorber.
Yes.
And the halo being a much more, protecting the driver from much more substantial impacts.
Yeah, and I think that the point that Mark made regarding safety is paramount.
Yeah.
And so if this creates a situation where drivers can avoid those instances like Massa did, and I think, Mark has got some sort of thoughts about this whole safety dimension, but it's got to be a good thing for Formula One.
It's a good thing, and I'm sure it will evolve and adapt, and it will get to look a lot better over time.
But then you've got people like Toto Wolff, who said if he was given a chainsaw, the first thing he would do would to remove the halo.
I thought the first prototype was on the Mercedes, wasn't it? Yeah,
probably.
So,
So there we are.
yeah.
And then another major change for this year in terms of the regulations is the 2018 tyre compounds. So Pirelli have bought 2 new compounds for this season. So to sort of understand where we are with this season, we need to reflect on 2017. So that was wider wheels, more aerodynamics, increase of downforce. I think, was it 10%?
Yeah, that magnitude.
Yeah, in terms of increase in downforce. So Pirelli went quite conservative last year with the characteristics of their tyre compounds to make sure that their tyres could withstand these higher forces. So now, having gathered a year's data in terms of all of the races from all the teams, they've now gone a step more aggressive. So we've got all the compounds are now a step softer. So last year's soft is now this year's medium. We have a new compound, the super hard, which is orange. And that is an insurance policy as far as I understand. It's basically in case they got their calculations wrong, it's already homologated, they can just bring it to one of the tracks if the compounds are found to be too aggressive. And then we've got the Hypersoft, which is the new pink, not purple.
Right.
So you've got the super hard, which is orange. The hard, which is now blue, was orange last year. You've got the medium, which is grey, the soft, which is yellow, super soft, which is red, ultra soft, which is purple, and then the hyper soft, which is pink. And that is seen as a very aggressive tyre to give drivers grip in those street circuits. But that's too many colours for you, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, I'm glad you understand it, Gemma, because for me, I struggled with 5, and now we've got 7. So I don't know what the fans will make of it. For me, working out what all these different colours mean, I can understand when you've got a single tyre supplier why they want people to talk about tyres.
Yeah.
I just feel it's just getting a bit too complicated. I also don't understand why the purple isn't the fastest, because when they do the sector times, the purple sector is the fastest sector. So that would help me as a fan to work out purple, that's the fastest tyre.
Yep.
But it's actually the pink, is that right?
Yeah,
it's the
pink
fastest.
is the Hypersoft.
Okay.
But they've stayed with the orange colour as the super hard, which is the hardest compound. So,
okay.
As I say, I'm glad you understand it. Yeah.
You seem to have got a grasp of it, no doubt, through your tyre experience.
Well, there we are. I don't have an excuse.
And of course, the Force Indias will look pretty in pink with their pink tyres. But to me, you know, we've been talking about cost reduction in Formula One, and with a multiplicity of tyres, I wonder what implication that has financially. I know that, you know, Pirelli are bearing a lot of the costs, etc., and that's why, of course, they want to be seen to have a range of tyres that people are talking about, because, you know, that's their brand placement, if you like. But I also think about the poor strategist.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, how are they going to contend?
They're going to have to run sort of 7x times simulations versus 5, aren't they? Yeah.
Yes, it'll make Monte Casino or whatever go.
They need better software. They need the artificial intelligence, you know.
Yes, the autonomous learning.
Yes, yeah. And of course, a former student of Cranfield is James Vowles at the a Mercedes team, where he's been the chief strategist.
Yeah.
So, you know, he's going to have to contend with this multiplicity of tyres, and it will be interesting as the season goes on how the tyres actually respond to a racing scenario as opposed to what we've just seen, which is testing. Yes, they will do long runs, but I'm still interested to see what will happen in the battle as such when they're racing against one another.
Of course, saying that normally at testing in Barcelona, because of the temperatures, I mean, you know, this year is ridiculous. It was snowing, for goodness sake, I think on the Wednesday of the first test. So you'd never really learn too much about the tyres because of the track surface. But actually this year, the Barcelona track was resurfaced.
Right.
So even in winter testing, this was before the snow was forecast,
yes,
teams were talking about, you know, maybe we could get a decent representation in terms of running on the Hypersoft because of the smooth track, therefore getting more temperature into the tyres and therefore getting the Hypersoft in the working range, even being at winter testing, which was quite interesting. So yeah, but I think
instead they had studded tyres, to do with the snow.
yes, and chains,
right,
exactly.
Right.
But I think just going back to your point with regards to sort of the Pirelli compound rainbow, I think yes, as a fan, it is a nightmare to try and figure out, especially how many tyres each team has got left, each driver has got left when it comes to, you know, when you're trying to preempt strategic decisions. And there's a lot of graphics and work going into trying to communicate that better. But I think what we have to remember is that, you know, these teams are racing across the globe with so many different scenarios and loads going into each of the tyres. So every track requires completely different characteristics from the tyres. So that's why we do have so many compounds. Yeah. And I think that the addition of the Super Hard and the Hypersoft, for example, is a consequence from last year and a sort of a ripple effect. But that's the fundamental reason why we have those different compounds. But yes, one too many? It's difficult to say, isn't it? So,
can I just ask, because with your experience on tyre engineering, what the scenario is when you have, say, a night race? What sort of challenges does that present?
To be honest, in places like Singapore, I just don't see how the tyres would last during the day in those.
Yes, quite.
The biggest, normally the European races start sort of 12 or 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
So normally, as you're going through the race, you're expecting the tyre temperatures to increase and everything moves in that direction. But obviously with the night races, everything's getting cooler. And that's the biggest difference in terms of the strategy. You just got to remember that actually the temperatures aren't going to keep going up, they're going to keep going down in terms of track and ambient temperatures, which have a huge effect on tyre performance.
And of course, Barcelona's not the only circuit that's had a new surface laid. I believe Silverstone has.
Yes.
Yeah, and at the weekend it was the 24-hour race there, so they're bedding it in. Yes,
exactly. Quite often you have that scenario where you have a new surface, but actually it's quite slippery because you've got the bitumen and that needs to be worn away before you get to the true grip of the track. So I think Barcelona, they had a couple of GT testing and lots of track days before testing. But I think the temperatures, especially that first test, just made everything pretty irrelevant
so
because
it didn't really rubber in.
Yeah. But yeah, by the time we come to the race, I think it will be, you know, is it the 5th or 6th race of the season maybe?
To Barcelona, yeah, I think.
Yeah, it's the beginning of the European stint.
Season, yes, as such.
I think we'll see some nice improvement on there. So, yeah, and then talking about sort of tyres and the Hypersoft, the softer compounds work better in, you know, the Hypersoft was designed for street circuits, and then we move into the Formula E versus Formula One conundrum. And Mark, again, your opinion on Formula E as a concept?
Yeah, I think it's a great concept. I like the sort of bold position they took in going totally electric and having city-based circuits. I think there will be a point in time when we see a convergence between Formula E and Formula One, because we've got people like Porsche, BMW, Jaguar, all going into Formula E. It's a fraction of the audience, you know, it's nowhere near as big as Formula One is. But I think it's going to grow and develop, and I think Formula One can learn from some of the things that Formula E are doing.
Yeah, I think that there is the opportunity to learn from the Formula E scenario, but I still got in the back of my mind this factor that what we've achieved where Formula One's concerned in powertrain efficiency is just fantastic. Unfortunately, Formula One has not broadcast this in the way that it should have done. And then as a consequence, I don't think that our legislators have necessarily picked up on the fact that there's an awful lot still to be done where hybridisation is concerned. And I think that whilst in Europe we're being told we're going to go down an electric avenue, if you like, I think the reality is that hybrid vehicles are going to be the mainstay for much longer than we're being led to believe, and that will be reflected in the fact that Formula One will carry on with a hybrid platform as opposed to going wholly electric, which was what Bernie was saying the other day. And I suspect that that's Bernie just, you know, playing with an audience.
Yes.
And one wonders, you know, should he still be playing with the audience when this is now Liberty Media's gig and not his?
Yeah, precisely, and I couldn't agree more with regards to the sort of Formula E side of things. And then in terms of, well, you mentioned Liberty Media. They are rebranding Formula One. We've got new logos, we've got Grid Girls Band, we've now got Grid Kids.
Yes.
We were talking about earlier about the theme tune.
Yes,
being, you know, do you agree with their overall strategy in terms of, you know, there's an element of making your mark and then completely changing things that don't need to be changed?
Yeah, I mean, the logo was an interesting one, wasn't it? There was lots
Yes.
of debate around that. And I think, you know, a new management team often changes the logo because they can change it.
Yeah.
But you need to do other things around the logo. And I think they're putting things in place. I think they've got some good people looking at all aspects of Formula One. But I think for me, one of the most exciting things is esports.
Yes.
Because I think as you move into this blurring between reality, augmented reality, whatever we call it, I think where people can actually race against Lewis Hamilton at home, in their living room, wherever, I think that's where some of the future is. So I think I really like the idea that they've embraced esports. I think the logo and things, I understand why they want to move things forward, and that's fine. But I think that's where the really interesting stuff is going on.
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing is a recognition of the audience for Formula
Yes.
One in a way where in the past Bernie and co were quite happy to really effectively address an older audience with their disposable income. He made reference, I think, to American Express card holders, etc., as being the only people he was really interested in. But the reality is we've got to play to a younger demographic, and we've got to think about what they're interested in, what their experiences are. And as you say, the whole idea of esports could be a great way of extending the reach of Formula One. What I've seen and heard, because I've spoken to Pat Simmons, who's a visiting professor here at Cranfield, a former student of the university, he's now at Formula One management, and Formula One management are working hard to see what they can do with data, for example, how they can bring data to play to actually get more engagement where the viewer is concerned, because there's so many opportunities there, as you well know,
Yeah.
you know, with CFD, for example, and what can be done.
Exactly, and I think just touching on the esports point, Pat Simmons himself was saying that actually Formula One management, obviously we've got these new regulations coming up in 2021.
Yes.
They're actually testing their theories in terms of aerodynamic development,
Yes.
and strategies like not staggering the grid, for example.
Yep.
But they're using esports as a testing platform
Yes.
to see, you know, as a bit of a run through as to how effective these new
Yeah.
innovations will work. And the data. There is so much data that each team is collecting every second a car is on track.
Yes.
There is so many simulations before, during and after.
Yeah.
You know, as I know from my work in a Formula One team, we were Manor F1, fantastic team, but we didn't have the resources as some of the bigger teams.
Yes.
So when I saw the amount of simulations going on, you know, in preparation for a Grand Prix, what on earth? How do you scale that up to the larger teams? And I think, like you said, the CFD, the dirty air. This is something that Chris Saylett from the MIA really has latched onto as well. Often you hear the commentators going, dirty air, and you sort of go, oh yeah, that's because of the dirty air. But actually, do you know what that means? And all it needs is a CFD simulation put over the live feed.
Yes.
And you can see that as Bottas comes up to Hamilton, he's covered in this red, you know, horrible turbulent airflow of the wake of the car in front. And he has to drop back to look after his brakes, his tyres, his engine. And I think that's something that people, you know, don't quite understand. And I think we've got such an opportunity, because we've got fans over here who don't quite understand some of the technical, more interesting aspects of Formula One.
Yes.
And we've got all the teams who are investing millions of pounds to simulate those exact scenarios. We just need someone to bring them together.
Even more simulations now with 7 tyres.
Yes.
Yeah, well, very true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Simulation upon simulation.
Yeah.
But again, I think what's interesting there is, yes, data can be very important to a team insofar as, you know, data is all, therefore it can give you a competitive advantage. And of course, that's what Formula One teams are always seeking, is competitive advantage. But there is a dimension whereby you've got to say, we need to harness this data
Yes.
to improve the show. Because the reality is we have a lot of technology, sophisticated engineering in Formula One, but it exists to entertain. It's highly technical, but it must continue to entertain.
That was one of the first things I learned at Cranfield when Chris Saylett from the MIA came in and said, you're in the entertainment business.
Who's your customer?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And I think, and when you say data, people sort of panic and they go, oh, graphs, you know, how am I going to be entertained through a graph and statistics? But actually, you know, take Hawkeye in tennis, for example. That's based on data of the tennis ball, and yet it's got everyone drumming in the grandstands, ooh, you know, to see if it's in or out on the line. Well, you could do something similar in track limits, and I've spoken to companies who are doing similar for MotoGP, for example, and they are working with Pirelli at the moment. And again, you know, that's data, but it's very visual, and we can all, you know, can you imagine in as it would be in Wimbledon at Silverstone, everyone drum rolling in their seats to see if, you know, Max Verstappen's wheels were in or out.
Yeah.
So there we are.
That's an interesting point, actually. I mean, with the technology available, we had some, you know, situations last season, where drivers had gone beyond track limits. There was an inconsistency in terms of approach. Is there something that could be done whereby they might wind down the wick, so to speak, so give them a penalty there and then in terms of the
real-time stuff?
Yeah, real-time stuff, you know, because why should it be that somebody gains an advantage or somebody has a disadvantage and they're not penalised there and then? It's like this nonsense, and it is nonsense to me. How can somebody go down the grid 35 places when there aren't even 35
Are they
places.
changing it for 2018?
Are they?
Aren't they? Yes.
Yeah.
15,
Yes, right.
15
Yes,
or
you're
more
right.
places they go to the back of the grid.
Yes, okay. Which
So
is,
they are simplifying that, so I'm pleased about that.
but to my mind, that penalises the driver. What I would like to see is a system in place whereby the constructor, so the Constructors' Championship is affected by the reliability issues. I mean, again, we've got into an amazing situation with these fantastic hybrid engines. I'm an advocate of hybrids, as you can tell. But, you know, the reliability of these cars, where they have to last for a season with 3 engines, 3 gearboxes, whatever it might be. And yet, the driver is the one who really takes it on the chin. So what I would say is, why can't they put in place a system whereby for the Constructors' Championship there's perhaps a different distribution of points and it's not directly aligned to the Drivers' Championship in that way?
Yeah.
Food for thought.
Completely agree, and I'm sure that's going to be something they're looking at for the 2018 season. And of course, in terms of sort of predictions, we've got the McLaren, Honda, Toro Rosso.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting to see how that evolves. I mean, Toro Rosso, Honda have got off to a good start with testing. They've got a lot of miles under their belts. McLaren have had a difficult time, but you know, I'm sure McLaren will come back, and it will be. I'm really interested to see how those two partnerships work out this year.
Also, it'd be interesting to see how Williams get along, because they've been in the wilderness for quite some time, and is that going to continue? But yes, as you say, you know, where predictions are concerned, I mean, if we were to sort of like say who we think is going to win, who do you think is going to win?
It's going to have to be the good old Lewis Hamilton and a Mercedes, because they've got just so many resources to simulate every scenario.
So that's the championship, Drivers' Championship and Constructors' Championship.
Yes, unfortunately, but you know, it's about I think Red Bull are going to be more competitive this season. I think that the gap between Ferrari and Mercedes is going to be closer.
Really? Okay.
So I think, you know, okay, outright performance, but maybe we will have, you know, a much more exciting battle for best of the rest, as it were.
And what do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I think Red Bull are going to be stronger, and I think that will add to the entertainment. You know, they've got two great drivers who are always very entertaining.
Yes,
so,
they're fantastic.
I think that will be part of the mix. Ferrari, I'm not sure. You know, they've got some interesting dynamics going on in terms of the team and so on. They're under a lot of pressure, and how that manifests itself in terms of performance, I think, is going to be another interesting thing in terms of the season.
Yeah. What I think is also interesting here is that we've got a scenario where we know that there are the, if you like, the elite teams with a significant amount of budget to go racing, and they seemingly spend that budget. And I think that in more recent years they've got more effective in how they allocate the spend in key areas. What I've noticed from my travels to Enstone, for example, is that Renault have put a lot of investment into the factory, and they seem to be investing in more people. So I'd like to see where Renault are going to end up, because, you know, I think that they're all right, it's a French company as such, but they're very much a British-based team, and they're in the heart of Motorsport Valley. But then it's the likes of the Sahara Force Indias, because they really did punch above their weight last season. And I'd like to see, you know, how is it going to unfold where they're concerned vis-a-vis, say, Haas, for example. I mean, are Haas going to come further up the grid? What's going to happen where Sauber's concerned, because they're now with Alfa Romeo, and it's a branding thing, we know, but perhaps there's more solidity there in terms of the financial underpinnings than there have been in the past, where Peter Sauber was, you know, just going, you know, with his hands cupped to try and get money.
And the other thing we've got on the horizon, of course, is 2021, where we're looking at new regulations.
Yes.
Everyone's saying the costs have to come down.
Yep.
So therefore, all these teams investing in these new facilities, what are they going to do? Are they going to agree to that? How can we move to a more cost-appropriate model, I think, is another big issue that will begin to evolve more over 2018.
Yes, and again, that's a conundrum for Formula One management, as well as Liberty Media.
And the teams.
And the teams themselves. You know, how much longer can they go on spending at the level that they are? I mean, you know, Mercedes ostensibly there's 2 cars being run during a season, and yet there's 900 people at the chassis factory. You know, it's a really interesting scenario. And yet, what we've seen where Mercedes is concerned is that a lot of that investment is actually to support R&D across Daimler, and not just, say, the marketing side of Mercedes to sell more cars. So I think what's interesting there, it's become much more integrated within the organisation.
I think that this season is going to be extremely exciting with new tyres. We've got the halo, we've got anything that adds a bit of variability, adds hopefully exciting racing. And then in the long-term view, 2021 is a fantastic opportunity for Formula One to reinvent itself. Whether it needs reinventing and how much reinventing,
and whether it can,
I think is going to be the topic of discussion for the next few years. But either way, Formula One is here, it's here to stay, and it's going to be extremely exciting this season, 2021. And we thank you very much for joining us on our Formula One preview show here at Cranfield University. And comment, like away, and we'll reply to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.